The day's daf is daf Chavtes. And we'll start 6 lines down from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Omer Rabbi Avo. Omer Rabbi Avo, my timer to Rebbe. What is the source for Rebbe's statement that with regard to sunlight, as opposed to moon, the sun rays diffuse in all directions? And the Gemara answers in the name of Rabbi Avo that we derive it from a pasuk in Tehillim, Lamnatzech al ayeles hashachar. And Chazal understood that this 22nd capital of Tehillim is a reference to Esther Amalka. She's called Ayeles Hashachar, which literally means the morning Ayeles. Ayeles is a female gazelle. And what is the name Ayeles? Why was it chosen to describe Esther? What's unique about the Ayala? Ma Ayala zu karneha mafsilos lekan lekan. That the combination of the word Ayeles or Ayala with Shachar, Shachar referring to the morning sun, is that just like an Ayala, its antlers will spread out and branch out in many, many different directions. Here, there, so too, the sunlight, the rays of the sun will spread out and diffuse here and there. Amar Abzera, Lama Nimshla Esther Layola. Why does David Amel choose to compare Esther to Ayala? And now the Gemara is going to talk about the biology of the Ayala, the gynecological biology. The womb of this particular female animal is narrow. And if I understand correctly, in the birth process, it's going to be hard for the Ayala because the womb is so to push out the vlad. But on the other hand, in terms of intimacy with another animal of that species, an ayal, it's very attractive to have a narrow opening. And she's beloved to our partner. And kol shavit shak it shona. In other words, the opening is so small that it's very pleasurable to have an intimacy with the ayala. And Esther, Af Esther, in the case of Achashverosh, she had a wonderful time, a desirable and enjoyable pleasure with Esther every single time, as if it was the first time. Now, I think I have some sofer here to share with you, if I could find it. The Chassam Sofer points out that this whole Gemara is a metaphor for Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael, like the Ayala, has Rachmat Sar. And as we said before, that makes the birth process quite challenging. Gemara Baba Basra says that the Ayala is very inhibited about propelling the vlad out of its womb because of the terrible pain. So Hashem sends some sort of according to the Gemara, it's a nachash, some sort of a serpent, and it bites her around that area of the womb, and as a result, she propels the vlad. Now, you might say that being stung by a snake is not a pleasant thing. It's certainly a davar ra, but nevertheless, at the end, it ends up with a davar tov because it facilitates the birth here. Now, the nimshal is Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael, if they don't do tshuva, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends them a nachash, like, for example, Haman of Russia, who bites into them. And that awakens them to do tshuva. It's a davar ra unto itself, obviously, Lara Glahash Glabe. But nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says this is for your benefit, because as a result, you're going to do tshuva. So the concept of a process which initially requires a great deal of suffering, nevertheless, it culminates with glory and with something very positive. Omar of Asi, Lama Nivshala Esther Shachar. Why is Esther here? Ayala. Why is she compared to the morning sun? Just like the sun rises to end the night, Af Esther, Sof Kol Hanisim. The great miracle that took place at the time of Esther is really the greatest and the last of all miracles. We will not experience any miracle until the end of days that could compare, that's on par with Esther. And therefore, her miracle is compared to the Shachar, to the bright sun that breaks through the darkness of night. The Gemara asks for Ika Chanukah. 200 years after Purim, we had Chanukah with its great miracle. And at this point, the Gemara completely reinterprets the statement of Ravasi. Nitna lichtov ka'amrinon. The question is whether we can incorporate the record of the miracle into the holy books of Tanakh. And there are 24 books of Tanakh. Esther was accepted as one of them, Megillas Esther. But if you take, for example, Megillas Antiochus, or any Megillah that describes the great miracles of Hanukkah, they're not part of Tanakh. In fact, there is no verse in Tanakh that mentions Hanukkah. So the Gemara says, Esther nitno lichtov. You are giving me a good answer as to why Esther is compared to Shachar, which is the dawn that follows the dark night, according to the Mandiyama, who says that the Torah itself was given in segments. This is a sugya in Masechet Gittin Daf Samach. And Megillah Nitna means that there were segments of the Torah that were given. Moshe Rabbeinu gave them one at a time. And then at the end of his life, he wrote up all 5 Megillahs to create a Sefer. Then we can understand that Esther would prevail over the Chachamim, what the Gemara calls in Masechet Megillah, Kisvuni L'Doros, include my record of the great miracles of Purim in Tanakh, upgraded to the status of Kisvei HaKodesh. And then everything works out very well. But El Laman Diomar, according to the dissenting view in the Gemara in Megillah, that the Chachamim never agreed to record Esther and incorporate the story, the Megillah of Esther, into Tanakh. Now, the truth is that Esther is part of Tanakh. No one denies that. But perhaps the machlokas is whether or not Esther has the full status of Tanakh. And the nafkamina, as the Gemara describes it in Masechet Megillah Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, is whether or not it's metame es hayodayim. If you take into your hand a Torah, a klaf, a parchment of Torah, then it's metame es hayodayim. And the Gemara establishes in Megillah Daf Zayin that the nafkamina between whether it's nitna likasev or ain't nitna likasev is this question of metame es hayodayim. The Gemara says on Daf Zayin, Sholchol and Esther l'chachamim kisvuni l'doros, meaning take the miracle of Purim and elevate it to the status of Kisvei HaKodesh, so it would be for all generations. And we write a Megillah, it says the response of Esther and Mordechai was that, you know what, It says in the Torah, "Ksov zos zikarim b'sefer v'sim b'ozneim shuki mocho emcha zecha molech." From the words "ksov zos," the Gemara derives that there has to be another book that's written that would describe the destruction of Amalek. And the Torah says "ksov zos" in Shmos Yud Zayin, and zos is written here, according to the Torah, as zikaron. Zikaron means we're going to have to write it a second time, and it says bas sefer, and that means that we have to write it again and again and again. And the extra writing is for Megillas Esther, because Megillas Esther is a zikaron to the destruction of Amalek. Obviously, we would need a lot more time to analyze that sugya, but just for our purposes, just to get a little bit of a flavor. The Gemara says the following. According to the Man Yoma, who says Esther lo nitna likase, what does Rabbi Asi mean when he says that Esther is compared to Shachar as the Sof Kol Anisim? It's not going to be Sof Kol Anisim. We had Chanukah. Mukim la Kirabi bin Yomin bar Yefes Omer Abelazar. Yomer bin Yomin bar Yefes Omer Abelazar. Lomanim shalot filason shel tzadikim kayeles. It means that when Esther goes into the king in order to present the case for Klal Yisrael, that's before the second, at the time of the second banquet, what were the words that she spoke? That's what this capital in Tilim Chav Beis is all about. Keli Keli Lomas Aftani, and so forth. And now we have an example, a paradigmic example of Tfilosan Shal Tzadikim. And the Tfilosan Shal Tzadikim in this particular context, referring to Esther, is compared to an Ayeles. Lo Malacha, Ma Ayola Zu, Arnea Maftzilos, Kolzman Shemigadeles, Af Tzadikim, Kolzman Shemarvim B'Tfilo, Tfilosa Nishmas. That just like in the case of the antlers of the Ayala, as long as the animal is growing, then its antlers will branch off in different directions. They still are growing and maturing. So the tzaddikim, even if they add prayer after prayer, they persist to pray consistently. Filosan nishmas, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will listen. And the Be'eri says that the Chiddush here is that Hashem will never say, I had enough. Don't bother me anymore. You prayed and you petitioned over and over again. It's coming out of my ears. No. The more, the better. Other Mefarshim say that with regard to Tfilas Tzadikim, even if they're not responded to immediately by Hashem, they're placed somewhere in a treasure, and Liyosid Lavo, God will respond to their prayers. So that's the end of the Agadah that we started yesterday. And at this point, we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Shachtu es haTamid. There was one occasion in which the Kohanim mistook the light of the moon for the light of the sun. Thinking it was daybreak, they went ahead and they shechted the carbon tamid. In such a case, since they made that mistake, because the moon was shining brightly, therefore they had to invalidate the carbon tamid. It was brought at night, and that's possible. Gemara asks a very naive question. Amo, when did this happen? What period in the year, what month of the year has it happened? If we go back to the Mishnah says that Higia Zman HaShchita, and then it says, second, Oridu Kohen Gadol Beis HaTvila. That apparently After this fiasco, and they had to replace the carbon tamid with another carbon once they waited until daybreak, then the Kohen Gadol would go into the mikveh. Why would the Mishnah mention the Kohen Gadol? Unless we're talking about Yom Kippurim, which would justify why this Mishnah is here in this Masechet. Says the Gemara, why is the Gemara telling us that? Why is the Mishnah telling us that the Kohen Gadol went into the mikveh? Why do we need that information? Unless we're talking about the special laws of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim that he has to go to mikveh. El of Yom Kippurim, well, Yom Kippurim is in the month of Tishrei. Ma'ar halavana mi'ika. Not only is it in the month of Tishrei, but it's in the first half of the month of Tishrei. You're talking about the 10th of Tishrei. On the 10th of Tishrei, the moon is hardly visible. How could they have mistaken the light of the moon for the light of the sun on the 10th day of Tishrei? So the Gemara says, you're going to have to put two dots in the Mishnah, meaning you're reading the Mishnah in one fell swoop, as if when the Mishnah says that the Kohen Gadol went into the Beis HaTfilah, that's a hemshech, that's a continuation of the story about the time in which the Kohen mistakenly thought it was day and it was the sun when it was really the moon. No. Ubiyom HaKippurim ki Omar Barak Bar Koi Horidu Kohen Gadol Beis HaTfilah. You have to put a stop in the Mishnah. You remember when we were youngsters, they had telegrams. Who can remember a telegram? So in a telegram, you would write, I think it said stop. Well, was that the word? To separate one sentence from another. So what the Gemara is saying here, you have to put a stop. There was a story that took place during a lunar month, but towards the end of the month, when the moon was shining brightly, and then when you finish that whole story, then you start with Horidu Kohen Gadol le Beis HaTfilah, meaning when they said Barkai, that it's already dawn. Now, Kohen Gadol, you're ready for your great day of glory, the Avodah, the Yom Kippurim, and the first thing you have to do is go into the mikveh. Tani Avua de Rabbi Ovin, Lozu Bilvad Amru. Not only is a carbon possible like the tamid at night, if we shechted at night, Ela'af Molikas Ha'of Ukvitzas Mincha Belayla is Tisarif. It's possible it has to be burned. So we're talking about Malika of an oath. The Malika of an oath will replace Shchita of a Zevach. And what happens is, in the case of a mincha, we need what's called kmitza. Kmitza in a mincha is equal to shchita in a zevach, or alternatively malika in an oath. None of these can be performed at night. And therefore, if a person does malika or kmitza at night, it's exactly the same as a person who shechts a carbon at night. And therefore, the carbon is possible. So the Olas HaOf is psula, and the carbon, so the mincha is possible. All this because it was done at night. And now we're going to turn to Daf of Tes Amid Beis.